All right, you may be seated. Good morning, everyone. Welcome and thank you for coming to Miles Fisher's Oral. We're going to have a really interesting topic to talk about today that Miles wants to share with you. Very relevant for all of us. So he's been my senior assistant in World History 2 this year, and it's been a fun time having him there, helping me teach, helping me grade, helping me do a lot of other things. So with us on the panel today are Benjamin Snell and Johnny Custer. I'm Chase Acuff. So I'm going to pray for us, and then we'll get started. Dear God, we just thank you for this chance to hear what you've given Miles to say. As you just bless him, be with him, help him to have his confidence and his strength in you, let your Spirit lead him and guide him. Just continue to pour into him as you've poured into him this whole time, God, that he's been here at MCA, been here with us, with his friends, with his family. Just please give the audience the ears to hear, help them to hear what you want them to hear as you speak through Miles, God. We just thank you again for this opportunity, and we just ask for your hand over it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to take a moment real quick to thank God for bringing us all here today. I'd like to thank the staff here and tutors of MCA for making the last 7 years of my life like the best 7 years ever. I'd like to thank my panel for coming out here today to help us seek the truth and make each and every one of us better. I'd like to thank Mr. Acuff for being the best tutor anyone could ever ask to senior assist for. I'd like to thank my family, my mom, my dad, and my brothers for coming and supporting me, and every one of you for coming out here to listen to me rabble on for a few minutes here. And with that, I'll begin. We are living in times unlike any other age in human history. We have access to more information than we could ever hope to possibly comprehend. We are distancing ourselves farther and farther from our identity, each other, our purpose, and the truth. Our perception of reality has become warped and twisted to the point where some people have forgotten who they even are. This is all because we live in a world full of imitation. The original inspiration for this topic came from Book 10 of Plato's Republic. In Book 10 of the Republic, Plato writes about his problems with imitations of real things. He gives an example of 3 beds. The first bed is created and designed by God and is the purest form of the bed. The second is crafted by a human carpenter and is inspired by the idea that God designed. And finally, the third bed that is now then created by a painter and imitated an imitation from the bed that the carpenter crafted. With each iteration, the original truth of the idea of the bed becomes diluted. The painter is 3 times removed from the truth. Plato argues that if a painter is skilled enough to imitate an object that appears to people to be real enough, they will just assume the image to be true, even though the painter does not know all the qualities of the bed. Plato continues to argue that since the art is 3 times removed from the truth, it is easy to make an imitation of the subject without knowledge of the truth, since it is just made upon appearances and not reality. One could easily correlate this with subjects in today's world. Movies, social media, video games, and pornography are all just imitations. Not only because they are not real, and just recordings or at the very least visuals on a screen, but because they do not fully capture the real experience or purpose and reason of what it is imitating. The entire advancement of video game technology, for example, is just to try to make the games as realistic as possible. But there are some things that just cannot be recreated in a video game. What makes video games addicting is that they give an imitation of an experience or a feeling of progression and advancement without all the pain and discomfort and the consequences of the very thing it tries so hard to make real. Many games imitate war, for example, but a video game can never be able to truly recreate the horrors that war brings. Just imagine if you really were a soldier, say in World War II, which many games do portray. Imagine the burden of having to carry some heavy equipment on your back, the exhaustion you'd feel from marching several miles into enemy lines, Maybe you have to engage in combat and you get shot, and there go the pain of a bullet wound. Maybe you possibly even have to suffer through the grief of losing a dear friend, or even the guilt of having to kill another man. All this can never be made real in a video game. And the thing is, we don't want to make them that way. When we play games, we want to have fun. We want to escape reality. We would all much rather experience an imitation of reality than face the cold, hard truth of the real world. When interviewing Tom Swin, MSW, LCSW, he directed me towards an article from Marlene M. Mayhew, PhD, about a new disorder called Internet Gaming Disorder. Symptoms of this disorder include withdrawal symptoms when not gaming, a development of tolerance, unsuccessful attempts to decrease time spent gaming or stop gaming altogether, a loss of interest in participating in any other activities aside from gaming, lying to loved ones about the amount of time spent on gaming, playing as a means of escape from stress or problems or to relieve negative mood, a risk of or loss of relationships, employment, or educational or career opportunities because of gaming. The symptoms of the disorder describe what sounds to be a drug addiction, and that is because it sort of acts like one. Much like a form of soma from Brave New World, these games act as an escape from the real world or any negative emotions that one does not want to feel. Take social media as another example of imitation. What was originally an idea that was supposed to make us more connected, more in touch with others, more social, if you will, has led to a greater disconnect, made fully realized by, ironically, another device that is meant to connect us, the smartphone. Most don't go anywhere without it, yet many don't go anywhere with it. Next time you're out in public, look around and see how many people are on their phone. All eyes glued to the screen, hesitant to look anywhere else they may miss what is on the screen. Some people can't even get to their destination without looking at their phone. The amount of people who text and drive is astounding. Couples will be on dates not only just with one another, but with their phone as well, rarely ever looking up to have conversation with one another. Most, but not all of these people who are on their phone are of the younger generations, but it does seem as though more of the older generations are slowly being drawn in. Everyone seems more infatuated with their devices, choosing to live in the fake digital world than rather than live in the real one. In fact, it is even sometimes considered to be weird to not be on your phone, when in reality, you're the only one choosing to live in the real world. What was made to make us more social has just replaced real social experiences with fake, imitated ones on the internet. Another one of the biggest problems with social media is that everything is a curated image or message that the creator and or the platform wants you to see. All people see now is just a highlight reel of everybody's lives, or even alter egos that aren't even real. This has caused an unknowable amount of people to build up an expectation in their heads on how their lives should be or how they should look. This has had a great effect upon the younger generations that have been raised on the internet that seemed and who see these false images and want to imitate them. Teenagers are probably the age group that seem to be the most impacted by this today. Both teenage boys and girls believe that they do not look good enough and yet expect their future partners to be in the top percentile of looks. Both genders see unrealistic beauty or other physical standards that most could not hope to possibly attain due to genetics. This has inevitably contributed to a high depression and suicidal rates in teenagers who are chasing these unattainable standards. Those who are already socially awkward now experience an amplified disconnect from other people, believing themselves to be unwanted outcasts when they otherwise could have gotten along just fine in a time before social media or the internet. Many of these self-proclaimed outcasts fall in their own self-fulfilling prophecy that is reaffirmed by views that they hear through their own circles of social media. If you listen to these outcasts or people that just spend too much time on the internet in general, you will find that many of their thoughts and ideas are just regurgitations of the thoughts and ideas and beliefs of people that they listen to on the internet. Some people who are of these outcasts seem to take this a step further and join movements such as the LGBTQ movement, for example, because they start believing some things on the internet, telling them like they're not in the right body, or maybe you're just not attracted to the opposite sex. This leads to further isolation and separation from society, which sends them further down the spiral, leading to a breaking point. This breaking point is often destructive in some manner to the outcast and those around them. These negative effects happen because most who consume or interact with these false, unobtainable images try to imitate them and yet fail to realize that they are not even real. The most extreme version of these outcasts are those who have been raised almost solely on the internet, with few to little daily social interactions in the real world. Since man is a social creature by nature, he will seek to have relationships. To try to fulfill this need to connect, many of these people will end up creating relationships with people on the internet. These relationships are called parasocial relationships. Relationships with one person, the audience member, who invest their own personal time and energy and emotion into getting to know the person they're watching without any personal interaction from the performer. This leads to the viewer gaining a personal, emotional attachment for the performer that is not reciprocated by the performer because the performer does not know who the viewer is. And yet, the viewer already knows so much about the performer. This has led to many sad interactions between performers and their fans, where the fan will meet the performer and realize that they are not who they thought they were, or the fan treats the performer like an idol. There are additional extreme and odd cases, such as this one I heard on the internet. I had been shown on the internet of this niche internet subculture called mukbang that I did not know existed until fairly recently. Mukbang is where there's a person on a video or stream eating food intended to appeal to people who do not have anyone to eat with in real life, so they eat with the person through the screen. One of these mukbang content creators held an event where some of her fans would be able to come and eat with her in person. What eventually happened is that fans, although sitting with their eating companion in real life, were still sitting there watching her live stream through the phone because that was what they were used to. It was all they knew, and it was what was comfortable for them because they were so used to viewing the world through the screen. They chose to replace the real version with the imitation. But what about those who are still young children today? They are the future of humanity, after all. Unfortunately, there seems to be a stark number of children that are not being raised by their parents, but rather by the iPad their parents gave to them. The unfortunate effect of this is that these kids will not only fail to develop necessary social skills, but also it limits their imagination. They are limited to only the things they experience on the iPad. One story is of a kid that I heard that still has the imagination of a child, but his imagination only goes as far as the games he plays on his iPad all day. He just wants to imitate what he experiences on the iPad. Imitation for young boys and girls is natural. In No Apologies by Anthony Esolen, Esolen talks about how young boys will naturally come up with complex competitive games that push them, using available resources, that will push them to their physical and mental limits. At most, they may take some inspiration from other sports. Often these games also have some physical risk at stake, the possibility of getting hurt. These dangerous games, he argues, is important in the development of the boys becoming masculine men. They also develop skills such as communication, coordination, teamwork, and problem solving. These games are fundamentally different from the games of the iPad kid. For one, they are purely an invention from the boys, manifested by their imaginations, which are still grounded in real-world sports or games. The games of the iPad kid are somewhat manifested by his imagination, but are just inspired imitations of the video games he plays on his iPad, which are imitations of themselves. Imitation is not an inherently bad thing. It can have its healthy uses, depending on where it comes from and what it is imitating. Kids will naturally resort to games that imitate their typical gender roles. Boys often play games that imitate war or some other competitive game to some extent, while girls usually tend to play with dolls, dress up, and pretend to cook. Such imitations exhibit the innate behaviors and roles the kids will or should eventually take up as they get older. Although still being imitated, these behaviors and roles are closer to the truth to the way God designed us. Boys will eventually become men, go get a job, make a business, get involved in politics. Whatever he does, he will always have some level of confrontation, much like the games he played when he was younger. Girls will become women, get married, have kids, raise a family, all roles they imitated when they were children. To some extent, the games of the children seem to prepare them for their future. These imitations are platforms for learning about life, especially when structured and guided. The problem is when imitation replaces the real version of something. That is where the iPad kid and so many people get it wrong. The games on his iPad are not natural. They do not imitate real-world values in the same ways as the kids who act them out in real life. It causes him to no longer think for himself and come up with his own ideas and creations. He gets stuck in the false realities of the digital world and possibly even forgetting his own purpose. The great culmination, and even possibly a factor in of itself in this world of imitation, is a lack of purpose in the people at large. Man has forgotten why he is here. Our civilization in the West was once the greatest civilization to ever exist in the history of mankind, is falling apart due to a lack of purpose. The philosophies of the 19th and 20th centuries are catching up to us, and the decadence of Western civilization is being accelerated by the very technology that we have created. People in our society constantly feel the need to keep up with social trends and values that are presented to them as good, even though they are not. People are believing anything and everything they hear on the internet to be true, so as long as that it is either aligns with their values and beliefs or it gives them a compelling enough argument to believe in it. All we are left with in this modern world is an existential feeling of emptiness, a feeling that we will never be good enough, a feeling of needing to fit in, yet quite never fitting in. So what are we to do? How can we generate change in our society on a day-to-day basis? How do we leave this world of imitation and come back to reality? Although it may seem simple, when eating a meal, for example, whether alone or with people, avoid getting on your phone for any reason. People can be interesting. Talk with them. Talk with your family. Talk with your friends. Talk with your spouse. With regards to your children, parents, I suggest that you regulate the amount of time they spend on their devices and what content they consume, because they usually have no counter-reference or foundation to view the digital world with. Please do not let their devices raise them. Promote them playing outside with their friends or siblings. For teenagers and young adults, do not care about what's going on online. Worrying about your online image or the online image of others is futile and ultimately fabricated, an elaborate lie or deception. The internet is not real. It may all appear real, but that is because it is imitating something that is real. Like the painting, it is an illusion that is just convincing enough to make you think, accept it as a real thing. But it can never be. There's so much more to life. All the good and fulfilling things in life happen in this real world. Remember, you cannot find the fullest versions of these imitations on the internet. The real thing will always be better. We must also find our purpose. There is a higher calling in life, and God is the answer to many of these problems. The virtues of Christ have been replaced by the virtues of the world, but we must seek to lift each other up and help those who are lost find their way back to God. We must seek to help them to find the true beauty in God's creation. Romans 1:20 says, "For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made. So they are without excuse." Psalms 19:1 also says, "The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork." We must return to the original, most pure truth, that being the creation and the Word of God. God created the world, man created the digital world. We are to have a relationship with Him and one another, not with creations of man. To be able to have a relationship with God, we must live in the world He has created for us. Doing this will help us find our purpose in Him. Our world, now being one full of imitation, is clearly not the answer. This path mankind is on can only lead to destruction if we do not do something about it. We will be replaced by future generations that will be slaves to the world of imitation. We must reject this world of imitation and return to reality, return to the truth. We must remind ourselves of our true purpose with God. Thank you.
All right, excellent work, Miles.
Thank you.
So, the usual question, right? What are your plans after MCA?
So I'm going to be attending Texas A&M in the fall, and I'll be majoring in business.
All right, very nice. So, apart from Plato's Republic, what was your personal inspiration for picking this topic?
I don't know. I felt like I spent too much time on the internet myself and too much time in the world of imitation. And I don't know, it was a couple of years ago, some people asked me, like, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? That kind of question. And, I still don't have an answer to that, really. And they'd come follow up with, well, what do you like doing in your spare time? And then I'd sit there and think, well, gee, I spend most of my time on YouTube. I mean, and really after some reflection, I gained nothing from that, really. I've no personal development, didn't get closer to God in any way. There's no benefit to it, I don't see, unless you have like a productive mindset going into it. But
because I know you're very passionate about this subject, and I think it's because you felt the consequences of the disconnect. Because I understand that I have the same experience too. So what are some of the biggest lessons that you have sort of learned while studying for this subject?
I don't know, I'll go back to kind of what I said before, is like, there's like a feeling of regret, like I didn't spend my childhood to the fullest extent, having wasted it on the internet. And I go back to, I wish I spent more time with, people. And, getting to know God better.
And there's a really weird irony there, right? Of like, because technically, I mean, these are things people are making, right? But it's also not people. That's something I want to talk about more. I think we all want to talk about that more. How this weird disconnect has developed. So you use a lot of excellent examples today of how this imitation occurs in our society. Do you think we can live in a world full of imitation even without technology?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, Plato wrote this, 2,000 something years ago? I mean, this was obviously a problem that he saw even then. And I don't know, I think people can get stuck in their heads a lot of times. And I mean, you also have like media and propaganda that plays a part in this too. I mean, we get deeper in that.
We should, because what I'm thinking of, because Plato does talk about this later as well in the cave, I think, right? 'Cause there seems to be this connection between imitation and the shadows on the wall in the cave.
It all comes back to the cave.
I mean, a lot of it does. So how would you explain this connection between the imitation you speak of and what Plato sees, what Socrates sees in his society while he describes the cave?
I also hate to bring up the Matrix, because that's just also like a blatant example. But I mean, people are plugging in to the digital world, and essentially living in it and choosing that version instead of the real version. I mean the amount of like the simulator games that are out there. Like people will play like farming simulator instead of like, well, if you're gonna spend all that time playing that, you might as well go start a real farm. Like,
I mean, it is pretty mind-boggling because these things get very realistic, right?
Yeah.
So why is there this duality then for us to even create things that are as lifelike as possible while avoiding actual life? Like, where does this come from, do you think?
I'll kind of touch on something I said earlier. It's like I don't think people want to feel all the negative side effects to, whatever activity they're imitating on in games or social media or whatever. They don't want to feel like say you want to get stronger. I mean, you got to go to the gym, you got to work out, you got to show up every day, all this time and discipline and effort. And in a game, you just press a button, and that's it. You're getting the satisfaction of progression without any discomfort or pain.
And it's interesting because, we who have spent too much time on the internet recognize that nothing really comes of it. And there's this idea in James, right, where it's like, count it all joy when you meet these various trials because you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And it's like there's no perseverance or character formed when there's no suffering.
Yeah. Well, yeah, if you want to look at it in that kind of morbid way.
Or even the good things, right?
Yeah.
'Cause, suffering, you suffer under the squat bar. Right?
You're forged in fire, right?
So that is a very interesting connection there. You can't have just the good. So, what is, in your opinion, sort of the fundamental difference between kids playing Call of Duty on a screen together and then going outside or playing cops and robbers when they kind of seem like conceptually very similar?
First off, the games are designed to be more fun than cops and robbers. Like, it's meant to give you a little dopamine hit. Every time you get a kill or something. And once again, you're not out there having to run and, get tired. You're just kind of sitting there. The only thing moving really is your fingers on the controller. That's it,
Yeah, and I wonder how much the dopamine that's manipulated in today's system is a part of all of this, right? Where it's like, I've never seen a kid addicted to playing cops and robbers.
No.
Final question before I pass the mic. So what, in your mind, is the fundamental difference between imitation that is healthy and productive as opposed to imitation that sort of detracts and disconnects us?
I think it has to have a purpose behind it, and a goal of like growth at the end. Even if it doesn't seem like that at first. Use the example I had of children coming up with games on their own. Like, there's still something there that it pushes them, physically and mentally. As I said, as Mr. Esselin said.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much.
Good job, Miles.
Thank you.
You've kind of burst my bubble, though, because maybe it makes sense why all my hours spent on YouTube watching golf instruction hasn't led to actual, better play. And funnily enough, you never see somebody hit a bad golf shot on YouTube.
No.
So yeah.
Well, it doesn't help when they're all scratch or better.
Right.
Well,
I want to jump into this quote that you said in your paper, which I found to be really interesting. You said man was built to be a social creature. What does being social mean? Can you define that for us a little bit?
Social is having a relationship with other people, having a relationship with God, interacting with society. I mean, I know they're, branched from the same society and social, or, sort of the same word in a sense, or have the same root, but.
Okay.
Yeah.
I kind of want to explore this and maybe distill it down a little bit more, because we were talking in the back before we came out about this experience we've shared of walking into the lunchroom and seeing like 8 different kids sitting around the same table, but all like this, right?
Right.
What's your, when you walk in there, do you have any kind of reaction to that when you see that happening?
I mean, in part, maybe a little disappointment, not only of like, oh, this is, what the world's come to, but, maybe a little bit of like myself as well. But it also, I don't know, it makes me wonder what a time was like before phones. Like, we'd have to fill in this time somehow. There was a good joke I heard. It's sort of a joke. It was more of pointing out a problem. Like, people were looking at these vast, magnificent structures built like in Rome and stuff. It's like, man, where do they get all the time in the world to make that? And it's like, man, you get so much more time when you don't spend all that on your phone. Like,
yeah, okay. I'm going to take kind of the devil's advocate approach, though, and I'm going to say, well, what about if those kids are all playing, Among Us? That was the hit a couple years ago, right? I don't know what they're playing now. But let's say they're playing a game together, but they're sitting there at the table. Well, aren't they being social? Don't they have everything they need to be interacting with each other there?
I mean, it is. I mean, I'd argue it's better than just individually being, on their phones. I mean, there is some camaraderie and conversation in that. But at the same time, it's not like if they went into, say, the practice gym or playing knockout, Which, and this is maybe a complaint I've had over the past few years. Is like, and maybe it's just a shift in the culture in MCA in general. I don't know what's caused it. My theory is the new gym floor in there. We're trying not to protect it, rightfully so. But like, I felt like there was something lost with that, because the practice gym, in my eyes, was always kind of like, oh guys, let's go down to the practice gym, and you just open the door and walk in, and the basketballs were all out, and we'd all pick it up and just play. But now, I walk by the practice gym and it's either closed or, the lights may be on, but nobody's in there. Rarely I will ever see any kids in there playing, but not nearly to the extent or the amount of kids in there playing as when I went through 7th or 8th grade or even 9th grade.
That's an interesting observation. It's probably my fault that it was closed for that one time I took food and drink in there and spilled it on the floor. But I think you're right that I do see less activity. So would you say that there is a strong correlation between like physical activity and this idea of being social with each other? Like doing something together is a part of it, not just doing something statically, but having a shared experience together. Would you say that's a part of a full social idea?
I mean, I'd say so, especially, I don't know, I'll give another example. Like, when COVID happened, we all moved to online. And so many offices, for what I heard, moved on to, working from home. And, they'd load on to Zoom or whatever and had their little meetings like that. But even then, I mean, I've never worked a job, but I feel like I would not be able to work properly in that kind of way. I'm very much so a creature of like, well, home's the environment I relax at and where we kick back in, and school or the office is the place we go to work. And I think I wonder, I had not looked at the statistic, but I wonder how much productivity was lost in people having to work from home. And I'm sure there was a great disconnect between the bosses and their employees and coworkers.
Okay, yeah, and that's really interesting. The one thing I'm thinking of, speaking of the COVID example, is recently I've gotten into Peloton, like the biking, because I'm rehabbing my knee.
Yeah.
But that really took off during COVID, and actually it's been kind of declining pretty rapidly recently. And I think there's a common theme of we are looking at each other on a screen from our home on our bike, but yet we are taking part in this hard thing together, this activity, this shared experience together. And yet there still is something missing, because now that we can go back to our gyms and be with each other physically in the same room, that Peloton's, declined in popularity.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know why my mind didn't go to this, but like team sports, I think are a great example. Like the camaraderie that's built, like on the basketball team. Or, we'll take the most extreme example, like the Navy SEALs. Like the reason they suffer so much is to build a bond between the men. Like, I heard an example, I think it was Jocko Willikin, was like, well, you have boot camp and it sort of sucks, and there's, a bond there made between men. And then they take it up at the next level, and it sucks some more. And then, there's a stronger bond. And then you get, all the way to Navy SEAL training. And, quite literally Hell Week. And it's, the tightest sort of bond, brotherly bond soldiers will have. Because they suffer through it together. They lift each other up when they were at their lowest. They help push each other through. And it took everybody to get through Hell Week.
So somewhere between Navy SEAL going through trials together and versus the non-trial of playing Among Us on our phones or whatever it is, somewhere between there. Because I agree with you. I think the Navy SEAL example is a very strong one, right?
Yeah.
But not all of us are going to be Navy SEALs.
No. And it is the most extreme version.
Yeah.
But there is absolutely something there of everybody physically being there, doing something that physically is painful, but still constructive.
Yeah, very
I think
good.
that's important. That it's constructive. Things can be painful and not constructive at all.
This is true.
But if it's constructive, that's where I think there's real growth.
Yeah, very good. I'll pass the mic.
Well done. Well, there's a lot of areas I'd love to jump into, and I'd like to jump into what Mr. Snell was talking about, this area of struggle and difficulty that bonds. But first, I want to hear a couple answers from some questions I'm curious from you about. What would you say is a favorite video game you played?
I don't know, one when I was younger, and it's still kind of, a little nostalgia for. Not cheesy, but I don't know, Minecraft has always kind of been a...
Minecraft? Okay. Yeah. What about
or
Minecraft?
Super Mario Bros. I'm going to change to Super Mario Bros.
Okay.
That was kind of...
I can relate to that one. Okay. Super Mario Bros. What about it made it your favorite?
I don't know. When I was younger, it was just kind of... Mario was the hero, right? And you sort of got to play as Mario. You kind of... good games make it so that you, the player, can kind of insert yourself as the character. Even if it's a named character that, has his own voice and stuff. They blur the immersion from what is real and not.
Okay. Blur the immersion. So you enjoyed the characteristics of what the character did? Is that what you're
It was just
getting at?
it was just fun.
Okay.
I mean,
It was fun.
it was fun.
And it's something you say in your oral that we play video games because we want to have fun. What is that we're wanting when we want to have fun? If we're to use different words, can you define that?
Man, it's such a simple question.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, some like excitement, some sort of feeling of progression and accomplishment, and even camaraderie. I mean,
So excitement, something that produces excitement,
Yeah.
is something that one of the reasons we go to these video games. Do you think, or maybe what would you say are the highest motivations to do something?
in general, to have a feeling of out of satisfaction or fulfillment.
Yeah, so there does seem to be a little bit of that, right, in those video games, right? There is a sense of accomplishment. Something gets done. You feel like you've accomplished something. Not in the real world, right?
No. And I don't know. See, I'd argue that they lead you on with a carrot on a stick. But once you do reach the goal, I don't know, you at least I felt it was like nothing. You're like, oh great, beat it, but what'd I really do? What'd I really accomplish?
Yeah, so there's a sense of inner accomplishment within the person, but nothing to show for.
Yeah. And no social, and I think it's important, no social recognition or, I mean, you sort of have the esports thing, but I don't think that counts as sports. And I don't think, supposedly it's getting bigger and bigger, but I don't know how that's entertaining, but very rarely, that's like the most extreme example, but very rarely is there any sort of like anybody else going, oh, great job, man. I'm so happy for you that you beat that game, like, unless you go out on the internet asking for it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there is this sense of accomplishment. You're getting something done, and that seems to be a good motivation, right? And maybe that's something, I think in having fun, what we really have in mind is there's this enjoyment, right?
Yeah.
And I think enjoyment is intrinsically good for itself. The difficulty is what kind of activities, do these things, and I think you hit on this, do they have a purpose, or do they have an aim or guide yourself towards? Now, I'm curious for this aspect. You talk about there being, this huge increase in video games, and it's pretty wild. Do you know how big the video game industry has gotten?
I do not know specifically, but I mean it's billions of dollars.
Yeah, it seems to be
billions.
One of the largest. It's bigger than both the music and the movie industry combined.
Yes. Which
is pretty ridiculous. Do you think this trend in human civilization is going to continue in this way? Or do you think people will realize in some sense that it's not as fulfilling as we thought?
I don't know, bringing in, I'd say, everything I brought up in this. Unfortunately I'd like to have a more hopeful outlook, but unfortunately I think our future is probably going to be more dystopian than utopian. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of the examples, I think about is, and this gets back to kind of Mr. Snell's point, one of the comments she made is that we'd all much rather experience an imitation of reality than face the cold, hard truth of the real world. And it does seem like our civilization would rather push away difficult things, death, struggle, where ancient cultures accepted that as being a way of life, part of something that was the normative thing that's going to happen. Now, if we do continue to go in this progression, we have lots of stories about what is going to be probably the most dystopian way this is going to happen. I want to give to you one of them and hear what you think. Have you ever heard of Robert Nozick's pleasure experience machine? He's this philosopher, and he says, "Hey, look, no, maybe no."
I feel like I've heard it, and I'm not recalling it this time.
Yeah, it's kind of the basis for a number of different movies and stories like this. But basically, the idea is if you could get put into this machine that would give you this feeling of enjoyment all the time in whatever capacity you want, whatever world you want, and you could live like that, would that be a life preferable to the one that you're in?
No, and I'll argue this is why. The way we're designed, I believe by God, is like, see, you have a candy bar, and you take your first bite of the candy bar, and it tastes amazing, right? Getting all the sugar, and it's the best thing since sliced bread. But as you start continue eating the candy bar, it's less satisfying. It's less. It doesn't taste as good. It doesn't give you that warm and fuzzy feeling like the first bite did. And then once you get to the last one, it's like, I'll finish it, and then that's it. But the difference between the first bite and the last bite is very different. The first one tastes amazing. The last bite, not so much. And I think if we were plugged into a world that was only full of, pleasure, of any kind, I think that's what would happen, is that eventually people would probably go mad because they wouldn't have anything to contrast the pleasure with. Then it'd be the baseline. I mean, it's like having to know the difference between good and evil. The only way you could tell the difference is having something to contrast it with.
Yeah, and I think probably what we, and you get at this in your oral is, you say that the problem is the imitation isn't the real thing. And I think people don't want that life, even if everything's fine, right? There's no struggle, no pain, no evil, no death. They never have a bad experience in the pleasure machine. I think what people don't want is they want true enjoyment, not just enjoyment or pleasure, but they want it to be the real thing. And they realize that that's not reality. They realize something intuitively that that's not going to be what their life is. It's not their life. They want it to be themselves that are having it.
Well, I don't know. I think that's what everybody would want in the end, or what they need. But everybody, I'll bring up like the marshmallow experiment, what I'm talking about, where they had these kids, they had this experiment with kids, and they offered them a marshmallow. And then they were like, well, you can eat that one, but if you wait, I don't remember, it's like 30 minutes, you'll get 2. And people would much rather take the marshmallow than wait and get the second one. And I think most people would much rather experience an immediate gratification than build up something over years of, long years of work and toil to have this like fulfilling, satisfying moment of whatever they were building.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm going to go ahead and pass.
All right, so continuing on that same train of thought, what do you think might be the other components of the worldview that is prevalent today that leads us to this, existential feeling of emptiness, feeling that we will never be good enough, a feeling of needing to fit in yet never quite fitting in? Like other dynamics, other beliefs maybe built into this problem.
I don't know. I brought up that I believe earlier in that paragraph is that the philosophies of the 19th, 20th centuries are now like catching up, right? I mean, what's it, the cycle of, we talked about this in world history too, where like you have the philosophy that then affects the culture, then the art. Well, social media, video games, movies today are effectively our modern form of like mass art, right? And I think we are now at the point where we're in the art phase of that. And it doesn't help the fact that social media has also accelerated these ideas. And I feel like we'll continue to propagate ideas that will like lead to these feelings.
So what do you think is the main sort of like content or the main idea in these philosophies from the Enlightenment, for instance, that is sort of like snowballed into this problem? Like, is there like a particular problem that you can identify as being the biggest problem?
I don't know if I can put it on like one thing, but an example I can think of is like everybody seems, I think it was Mr. Custer that sort of touched upon, like, everyone is afraid of death and aging, and to feel that, they also feel the need of like upholding a certain image and to look a certain way. And when everybody's going to age, everybody's going to get old. And at some point, people will realize that. And realize they can't control that part. And I think that leads to that part in some sense.
It seems like the common theme of all those things you're saying is the avoidance of truth.
Yes.
Of reality as it is. And I think it's really interesting. I was reading through John the other day when Pilate is responding to Jesus. It's like he's asking, who are you? Are you a king, etc.? And Jesus says, for this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I've come into the world to bear witness to the truth. And so Pilate says, what is truth? It's like, that's part of the problem here, right? It's like, the Matrix. It's the guy who chooses to go back into the Matrix.
Yeah, because the steak tastes good, right? Well, and that just reminded me of another problem. Is like everybody, I think in a lot of ways you could summarize social media as like, make your own truth. And I feel like a lot of people do that and don't really base that truth on anything other than themselves, or they want to feel, or what they believe at the time.
But then the consequences are the disconnect, the lack of actual purpose, because they're not living in actual truth. So these are really good insights, Miles.
Well, it doesn't stem from God; it stems from man.
Yeah, right. And truth doesn't come from us, right? So I'm going to pass the mic along because we're running out of time. But thank you. It's been a great conversation.
I think we're actually just going to go to questions. I think it's your time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do y'all see a solution of this problem? And what would that be?
That's not like, my most embarrassing story or something like that. Do I see a solution to this problem?
I know it's very broad and deep.
I want to take a page out of Mr. Custer's Lord of the Rings elective lit class for the seniors this year. And one of the ideas we talked about is this idea of tilling your own field. The world's a very big place, and at this singular moment in time, I cannot affect the entire world. What I can do is be responsible with the gifts and talents that I've been given with, with my family, with, maybe students here at MCA. But I've been given, a small field and trying to be responsible with what I've been entrusted with. And if I can do that in my field, and Mr. Custer can do that, next across the fence in his field, and Mr. Acuff can do it over there, then there can be change that way, right? God chooses the least of, the Israelites to be the ones that lead the armies into battle, right? And that to show his omniscience and his omnipotence, right? And so I'll do the best that I can with, my family and my daughter. I will try not to put an iPad in her hand when we go to, go out to eat like I see so many other families doing. And we'll try to walk that road well. And we'll pray for God to take care of those results.
Yeah, that's a difficult question, and yeah, I'm not sure there really is a well-rounded answer. I probably would share Mr. Snell's, because I share the Tolkien vision, and there's a lot of value and truth to tilling your own garden. That's what you have, and that's where God's put you. And as you have that, it connects to everyone else's. And I think when people really taste and see, when they really have an experience of what is going on in God's world, and they really have the place and perspective to acknowledge and be grateful for it, they'll prefer that to the imitation. And I think, and that's one of the things. I didn't get to this, but it's one of the things Tolkien gets into. He has this article on fairy stories, and he says, "Look, this art isn't bad in itself. To get into this fantasy world, to get into this world of imitation, it itself isn't inherently bad. But it's bad to stay in there, like you said. It's this remaining in there, spending too much time.
It's when it replaces the real thing.
Yeah, and so he says the value of it is to go into there, because there is a value of escaping from something that is harmful or bad in the world, right? So there is this good to go, wait a minute, this is difficult, I don't like this, it hurts, and you get into this other world, and it reorients you or gives you a shift in perspective. And as long as it can do that valuable shift in perspective so that you can come back to the real world and go, okay, now I can address what was harmful in a good or better way, that's the value of a game, right? It prepares you to go on to life in a better manner. So there are some games that do this well, some games that don't, and of course the amount of time you spend in it also is going to hinder you. So I would say if we can allow ourselves to enter into that, it takes a person who's gone on down into the cave and then been out of it, and then can go back and say, hey, look, here's what's going on. I've tasted and seen the real things. Come with me. Right, and that's what Jesus does. He offers us. He says, "Hey, look, come and taste and drink from the real living waters." And if people want to, I think they'll see it's better. But I think it happens one neighbor at a time.
Yeah, that reminds me of the psalm. Taste and see the Lord is good. I think as people experience the disconnect and the lack of purpose, and if we are able to show them, here's something better, that goes a long way. And I was also thinking, Luke Blackwell, as he clarified to our RT group, hang up and hang out, is a good example to set for these kids. So whenever you're around people who are struggling with it, take the initiative to be different. I think it goes a long way. I've seen it, but again, right, only the people around us. I think as long as Romans 1, this idea of people exchanging the glory of a mortal God for images resembling mortal man and other things, etc., etc. It's this is going to be a pattern that continues in the world until the end of the world, I think. But we can do our part to make at least our immediate surroundings a better place, being the light of Christ. We can. There's definitely, as Christians, there is value to understanding the problems here. So we don't fall into the same snares and the same traps. So I'm really glad you talked about this. It's been a good conversation and a good time. Very, very insightful. So I'll have Mr. Snell close us in prayer.
Lord, thank you just for this day and for Miles' willingness to come and share something close to his heart, something he's been thinking a lot about, and something that he's grown a lot in. We just praise you for that growth. We thank you that he challenged us today. I pray that we would think about these things that he's introduced and how we can apply them to our lives and be the people that you made us to be. We thank you and praise you for Miles, and we're proud of him for what he's done today. In your name, amen.
Amen.